The silence in my mother's house was a physical thing. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a Sunday afternoon nap or the hushed reverence of a library. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket woven from the threads of absence. 3 weeks had passed since the funeral. 3 weeks since the last of the casserole dishes had been returned and the sympathy cards had dwindled to a trickle. Now it was just me, the dust motes dancing in the slanted afternoon light, and the ghost of the woman I called Mom. Her name was Eleanor Vance, but to me, she was simply the fixed point around which my world revolved. My mother was a woman of gentle routines and quiet passions. Her domain was the garden, a riot of lavender, roses, and stubborn tomato vines she coaxed from the earth with what I always called magic fingers. Her sanctuary was the kitchen, a place perpetually scented with yeast, cinnamon, and the clean, sharp smell of lemon. She was the steady hum of a lullaby, the comforting weight of a hand on a feverish forehead, the unwavering certainty that no matter how far I strayed, home would always be here, smelling of freshly baked bread. I thought I knew her. I truly did. I could have catalogued her life with the precision of an archivist, my chosen profession. Eleanor Vance, born in a small town in Ohio, married Robert Vance at 22. Gave birth to me, Alara, at 25. She was a devoted wife, a doting mother, a woman who found her joy in the small, tangible miracles of domestic life. Her history, as I understood it, was an open book with pleasant, predictable chapters. But as I began the Herculean task of sorting through a lifetime of her belongings, I started to feel the first faint tremors of doubt. It was in the little things. A collection of poetry books by a poet I'd never heard her mention, filled with passionate, almost desperate-sounding verses, the margins filled with her elegant, looping script, a single letter drawn over and over, a photograph at the bottom of a jewelry box, tucked beneath a string of pearls, showing a much younger Eleanor, her hair wild and windswept, standing on a rocky shoreline with a man who was not my father. They weren't smiling. They were laughing, a raw, uninhibited joy that seemed alien on the face of the serene woman I knew. I dismissed it. A college friend, an old flame before she met Dad. People have pasts. It didn't change the fundamental truth of who she was. My father, Robert, had passed away 5 years prior, and in the time since, she had seemed to fold into herself, her quietness deepening, but her essence remained unchanged. She was Eleanor, my mother, my constant. The house was a museum of her life with us. My crayon drawings were still taped to the inside of a pantry door. The worn armchair by the fireplace still held the faint imprint of her body. Every object I touched whispered a memory. The heavy cast iron skillet pancakes on Saturday mornings. The worn gardening gloves, stiff with dried soil, her escape, her therapy. The cedar chest at the foot of her bed, filled with my old baby clothes and school reports, each tied with a neat satin ribbon. She was a curator of our shared history, a preserver of our family's story. It was on a Tuesday, a gray, drizzly afternoon that mirrored the mood inside the house and my own heart, that I finally approached her bedroom with a roll of packing tape and a stack of cardboard boxes. Her room was the most potent concentration of her. It still smelled of her, a faint mix of lavender sachet and oil of Olay. Her reading glasses were on the nightstand, next to a half-finished glass of water. It was as if she had just stepped out and would be back any minute. The illusion was so powerful it made my chest ache. And there it was, on the nightstand beside the glasses, her diary. I'd known about it my entire life. A thick, leather-bound volume with a simple brass clasp. It was as much a part of her bedside landscape as the lamp and the alarm clock. When I was a little girl, I'd asked what was inside. Just my silly thoughts, darling, she'd said, her smile gentle but firm, a soft but clear boundary, a place to put the day's clutter. I never asked again. It was her private space, and I respected that. Now, it felt different. It wasn't just a book. It was a final piece of her, a part of her mind and soul that was still here. I felt a desperate, clawing need to hear her voice again, even if it was just on paper. The grief was a chasm, and I thought, perhaps, her words could be a bridge across it. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The leather was soft and worn, supple from years of her touch. It felt warm, as if she'd just set it down. I sat on the edge of her bed, the mattress sighing under my weight, and unlatched the clasp. The sound was a soft, metallic click that echoed in the profound silence. I opened it to the first page. The date was from 30 years ago, shortly after I was born. October 12th. Alara slept through the night for the first time. Robert and I just sat by her crib for an hour, watching her tiny chest rise and fall. My heart feels like it might burst. This love, it's a terrifying thing. So fierce. A love I must protect at all costs. I smiled through a film of tears. This was my mother. This was the woman I knew. I turned the pages, my initial trepidation melting into a warm, bittersweet nostalgia. The entries were a chronicle of my childhood, a parallel narrative to my own memories. June 3rd. Alara took her first steps today, tumbled right into the azalea bush, came up with a face full of dirt and a fist full of pink petals. She didn't cry. She just laughed. My brave, beautiful girl. September 1st. First day of kindergarten. She was so proud of her new lunchbox. She walked in without a single look back. I was the one who cried all the way home. Robert had to make me a cup of tea and sit with me until the shaking stopped. How can one small person hold so much of my heart? Page after page, it was the same. Recipes she'd tried, worries about my grades, joy at my small triumphs. She wrote about my father with a deep, steady affection. May 20th. Robert fixed the leaky faucet again. He's such a good, dependable man. He looked at me across the dinner table tonight and smiled, and I felt such a profound sense of peace. I made the right choice. I know I did. This life, this quiet harbor, it's what I needed. It's what she needed. That last part gave me a slight pause. I made the right choice. It implied there had been another, different choice. But I quickly dismissed it as the kind of reflection anyone might have. Life is a series of choices, after all. I spent hours reading, losing track of time as the light outside faded from gray to a deep, inky indigo. I was in the last third of the diary now, the entries growing more sporadic as the years passed. They were shorter, more reflective. She wrote about my college graduation, my first real job, the day I moved into my own apartment. And she wrote about my father's illness. Her words a stark, painful testament to her strength and her sorrow. March 11th. The doctor used the word palliative today. Robert held my hand the whole time, as if he were comforting me. My strong, good man. I don't know how to do this without him. The quiet will be unbearable. Reading those words felt like a violation, but I couldn't stop. I was seeing the steel spine beneath her soft exterior, the immense fortitude it took to nurse the man she loved to his end while maintaining a facade of calm for my sake. My love and admiration for her deepened with every page. I was nearing the end. There were only a dozen or so pages left. The entries were dated from the past 5 years, after my father had died. Her handwriting, usually so fluid and graceful, had become tighter, more cramped. The entries were infrequent, sometimes with months in between. July 16th. The garden is a comfort. My hands in the earth. It's the only time the silence doesn't scream. Sometimes I see Robert in the corner of my eye, sitting in his chair on the porch. A trick of the light. A trick of a lonely heart. January 5th. Alara came for dinner. She worries about me. I see it in her eyes. I try to be cheerful, to be the mother she remembers. But some days the performance is exhausting. The mask is so heavy. The mask. The performance. The words snagged in my mind. What mask? What performance? The mother I saw was quiet and grieving, yes, but she was still her. Wasn't she? A cold knot of apprehension began to form in my stomach. I felt like an intruder again, like I was about to overhear something I was never meant to know. I should have stopped. I should have closed the book, respected her final privacy, and held on to the image of her I'd cherished my entire life. But I couldn't. It was as if the book itself held me captive. I turned the page, and the world tilted on its axis. The date was August 28th, just 4 months ago. The handwriting was starkly different. It was jagged, frantic, words slashed across the page, stained in places with what could only have been tears. The tone was no longer reflective or gentle. It was a raw, primal scream of anguish. August 28th. He would have been 40 today. 40. A grown man. I saw a young man at the market today with his son. The boy had his hair, that wild, chestnut curl. And his eyes, God, his eyes. I had to grip the shopping cart to keep from falling. 40 years. Has it been that long? Some days it feels like a lifetime. Most days it feels like yesterday. Who would have been 40? I did the math, my mind numb. 40 years ago, my mother would have been 19. I wasn't born. My father was still just a classmate she barely knew. A cold dread, slick and oily, slithered up my spine. I read on, my heart hammering against my ribs. I close my eyes and I'm there. On the cliffside, the salt spray on my face, the wind whipping my hair, and Leo's hand in mine, his laughter. He called me his Eleanor Rigby, all alone in my own world until he came along. He painted me, not the quiet girl my parents wanted, but the fire he saw inside me. We were reckless and stupid and so incandescently alive. Leo, the man from the photograph, the L in the margins of the poetry books. It wasn't just a college flame. This was something else entirely. This was a fire. My parents called it a disgrace, a summer madness. Him with his paint-stained fingers and no prospects. Me, their good daughter, ruined. They gave me a choice, him or them, a life of shame or a life of respectability. They never knew the real choice they were forcing on me. It wasn't just about Leo. The next sentence was almost illegible, the ink blurred and smeared. I had to hold the page up to the lamplight, my breath caught in my throat. They never knew about the baby. My baby. Our baby. No. The word was a silent scream in my head. No. It wasn't possible. My mother. My quiet, proper, predictable mother. I felt a wave of nausea, the room seeming to shrink around me. This was a mistake. A story she was writing. A fantasy. It had to be. But the raw agony on the page was not fiction. It was the sound of a heart breaking over and over again for 4 decades. I turned to the final page. There were only 2 entries left. The first was dated a month before she died, the day she received her own terminal diagnosis. October 2nd. The doctor said it's the pancreas. Not long now. It's strange, but my first thought wasn't fear. It was relief. The performance is almost over. The weight I've carried for 40 years is getting too heavy. Robert is gone. Soon I'll be gone too. But what about Alara? She'll be alone. She deserves the truth. All of it. She deserves to know the woman her mother was, not just the ghost I became. I will leave this diary for her. It is the only confession I can make. My vision blurred. A confession. She had wanted me to find this. She had wanted me to know. The realization didn't bring comfort, only a deeper, more profound shock. The entire edifice of my mother, the woman I had built in my mind and heart for 30 years, began to crumble, brick by dusty brick. I looked at the very last entry. It was just a few lines, written in a hand so shaky it was barely her own. It was dated the week before she passed away. His name was Rowan. My son. My beautiful boy. I held him for 1 hour. I memorized every line of his face, the tiny curl of his fist, the soft down on his head. I named him Rowan, for the mountain ash, a tree of protection and strength. Then they took him away. I never saw him again. I pray to a God I don't believe in that he had a good life, that he was loved. And I pray, Alara, my precious girl, that you can forgive me. Forgive the secret I kept, and the woman I couldn't be. I closed the diary. The soft thud of the cover echoed the final, dull thud of my heart. The air rushed out of my lungs, and a sound I'd never heard before tore from my throat, a dry, ragged sob of utter desolation. I looked around the room, at the carefully tended sanctum of the woman I thought I knew. the lavender sachet, the neat stack of books, the family photos on the dresser, mom, dad, and me smiling. Perfect family. Perfect lie. Rowan. I had a brother, a 40-year-old man, somewhere out in the world, who shared my mother's blood. And my mother, Eleanor Vance, the saint of the kitchen and garden, the quiet pillar of my life, was not the woman I knew. She was a stranger, a girl with fire in her heart who loved a painter named Leo, a teenage mother who gave up her firstborn son, a woman who spent 40 years performing a role, hiding a wound so deep it had defined her every action, every quiet moment, every sad smile. The myth of Eleanor was dead. What I had found in those final, devastating pages had not just changed my perception of her. It had erased everything I ever believed to be true, and in its place was a gaping, terrifying void. I wasn't just grieving my mother anymore. I was grieving the life I thought we'd had, and the brother I never knew. The diary lay closed on the duvet, but its words were seared onto the inside of my eyelids. Rowan. Leo. The performance is almost over. My body was rigid, locked in a state of shock so profound it felt like paralysis. The initial sob had subsided into a series of silent, convulsive shudders. The house, which moments before had felt like a comforting embrace of memory, now seemed alien and hostile, its familiar objects mocking me with their placid ignorance. The smiling family photos on the dresser were a grotesque parody. The woman in those pictures, her arm around my small shoulders, was a phantom. The real Eleanor had been somewhere else entirely, trapped behind a wall of secrets, grieving a life I never knew she'd lived. My first coherent thought was one of betrayal. A hot, bitter anger surged through me, so potent it momentarily eclipsed the grief. How could she? How could she have built our entire lives on such a monumental lie? My childhood, my understanding of family, my very identity, all of it felt fraudulent. Was my father just a consolation prize? Was my entire existence an attempt to paper over the cracks of her broken heart? The questions were venomous, circling in my mind like vultures. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and began to pace the confines of her small bedroom. I needed to move, to do something, anything to outrun the storm in my head. My archivist's mind, usually a source of comfort with its love for order and fact, was in overdrive, frantically trying to recatalog a lifetime of memories through this new, horrific filter. The pieces started to click into place with a sickening finality. Her sadness. It wasn't just a gentle melancholy, a personality trait. It was an active 40-year-old grief. The way she would sometimes stare into the middle distance, her hands still in a bowl of dough or her trowel hovering over a patch of earth. A look of such profound sorrow on her face that it had sometimes frightened me as a child. I'd ask what was wrong. Just thinking, darling, she'd say, the smile never quite reaching her eyes. She wasn't just thinking. She was remembering. Remembering Leo. Remembering Rowan. Her overprotectiveness. I had always chafed under it, seeing it as a lack of faith in my abilities. She'd panic if I was 10 minutes late, call my dorm room every night when I was in college, her voice tight with an anxiety that seemed disproportionate to the situation. It wasn't just maternal worry. It was the terror of a woman who had already lost one child. She wasn't just holding on to me. She was clinging to me, the child she'd been allowed to keep, the unexplained rituals. Every year on August 28th, she would be impossibly quiet. She'd bake a simple, small Kikino candles, no celebration, and we would eat it in near silence. I asked why once. It's just a day for remembering, was all she said. I had assumed she was thinking of a deceased grandparent or a distant relative. She was marking her lost son's birthday. 40 cakes. 40 years of silent, solitary mourning. I stumbled out of her bedroom and into the hallway, my gaze sweeping over the family portraits lining the wall. There was our trip to the Grand Canyon. Dad looking proud, me as a gangly teenager, and Mom smiling serenely. But now I saw it. The smile was a carefully constructed mask. Her eyes, if you looked closely, held a permanent shadow. She was there, but she was also a million miles away on a cliffside with a painter. I sank onto the top step of the staircase, my head in my hands. The anger began to recede, washed away by a tsunami of empathy so vast it left me breathless. I thought of her as a 19-year-old girl, terrified and alone, forced to make an impossible choice. Her parents, the people who should have protected her, had instead presented her with an ultimatum: shame or security. And in the middle of it all, a newborn baby. Her son. The diary said she held him for an hour. 1 hour. 60 minutes to contain a lifetime of love and loss. I tried to imagine the strength it must have taken to walk out of that hospital or agency alone. The strength it took to go back to her life, to marry a good, kind man, to raise another child, all while carrying that gaping wound inside her. She hadn't been a liar. She had been a survivor. The performance wasn't an act of deception. It was an act of monumental endurance. My father. Did he know? The question spurred me into action. I went to his study, a room I'd barely touched since his death. It was a masculine space, smelling of old books and pipe tobacco. I went to his desk and pulled open the bottom drawer, where I knew he kept his most important papers. Beneath his will and our home's deed, there was a small, lacquered box. I opened it. Inside was a stack of letters, tied with a faded ribbon. They were the letters Eleanor had written to him during their courtship. I sat on the floor and read them, the elegant, looping script so familiar yet telling a story I'd never heard. Her words were gentle, intelligent, and kind. She wrote of books she'd read, of her hopes for a quiet, stable future. There was affection, respect, a clear and genuine fondness for my father. But the fire was gone. The incandescent spark that lit the pages of her diary when she wrote of Leo was nowhere to be found. This was the writing of the woman who had chosen the harbor over the storm. At the very bottom of the stack, I found a letter from him to her, dated just before their wedding. My father's handwriting was blocky and practical, so different from hers. My dearest Eleanor, I know you have a sadness in you. I don't know its source, and I see that it is a place you cannot share with me. I want you to know that I am not asking you to. I love the woman you are today, and I will love the woman you become tomorrow. I will not try to fix the parts of you that are broken from a past I wasn't part of. I will simply be here, to build a new life with you, and to love you quietly and completely. That is my promise. Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the yellowed paper. He knew. Maybe he didn't know the specifics, the name, the child, but he knew he was marrying a woman with a haunted heart. And he had loved her anyway. He had loved her enough to give her the space and the silence she needed to carry her burden. Their marriage wasn't a lie or a second-best option. It was its own kind of love story, one of acceptance, patience, and profound, quiet devotion. He had been her anchor, her safe harbor, and he had kept his promise to the very end. This new knowledge didn't erase the pain, but it reshaped it. The betrayal I felt toward my mother softened, replaced by a deep, aching love for both of my parents and the silent, difficult pact they had made. My archivist's need for the tangible truth returned. The diary was a confession, but it felt incomplete. There had to be more. I thought of the photograph, the one of her and Leo at the bottom of the jewelry box. Where were the other relics of that life? A woman doesn't survive a fire like that without a few hidden scars, a few saved embers. I went to the attic. It was dusty and smelled of cedar and thyme. Boxes were stacked everywhere, labeled in my mother's neat script: Alara's schoolwork, Christmas decorations, Robert's old clothes. I searched for an hour, my hands growing grimy, my hope dwindling. There was nothing. No box labeled secrets or the life before. Dejected, I was about to give up when my eyes fell upon an old, battered trunk in the far corner, half hidden under a canvas tarp. It was different from the other snow label, the metal clasps rusted shut. It felt ancient and forgotten. It took a screwdriver and a good deal of effort to pry the clasps open. The lid creaked upwards, releasing a faint scent of dried flowers and old paper. My heart stopped. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed tissue paper, was the physical evidence of her other life. There was a stack of charcoal sketches, all of them of her. A young, vibrant Eleanor. Her hair a wild halo, her eyes full of defiance and laughter. On the back of one, in a bold, artistic scrawl, was written, "My Eleanor, my fire." Beneath the sketches was a small silver locket. I opened it. On one side was a tiny, professionally cut picture of Leo, the handsome, smiling man from the photograph. On the other, a minuscule, faded snapshot of a newborn baby, wrapped in a hospital blanket. Rowan. His eyes were closed, his face serene. And at the very bottom of the trunk lay a single, pressed and faded Flo-era deep purple wild aster. I didn't know why it felt significant until a line from the diary echoed in my mind. I close my eyes and I'm there. On the cliffside, the salt spray on my face. I suddenly remembered a family trip we'd taken to the coast of Maine when I was 10. My mother had stood on a cliff overlooking the ocean, and I had seen her cry. She'd pointed out the wild asters growing among the rocks and told me they were her favorite flower, a symbol of patience and love. I had thought it was just a random botanical preference. It wasn't. It was a pilgrimage. This trunk was her secret heart. It was the one place where Leo and Rowan were still real. She had kept them hidden away, a painful, precious treasure she could visit in secret. I carefully closed the trunk, the weight of its contents settling not in my hands, but in my soul. I went back downstairs and sat in her armchair by the fireplace, the diary in my lap, the locket warm in my palm. The house was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was filled with the presence of a woman I was only just beginning to meet. The woman who was Eleanor. Not the one-dimensional saint of my childhood, but a complex, passionate, tragic, and astonishingly strong human being. She had loved with a fire that could have consumed her. She had endured a loss that would have shattered most people. She had built a life of goodness and love from the ashes of her past. She had protected me, loved my father, and tended her garden, all while carrying the ghost of a lost son and a lost love in her heart. What I found erased everything I believed about her. I had written that thought in my own journal the night I read the diary. I realized now I was wrong. It hadn't erased her. It had filled her in. It had taken the flat, black and white photograph of Mom and transformed it into a living, breathing, three-dimensional masterpiece, full of shadow and light, vibrant color and deep, aching voids. My grief for her was still there, a raw and tender ache, but now it was intertwined with a new, fierce pride. I was the daughter of Eleanor Vance. Not the simple homemaker, but the woman who survived. I opened the locket again and looked at the tiny face of the baby. My brother, Rowan. He was out there somewhere. A 40-year-old man with chestnut hair and my mother's strength. She had prayed he was loved. She had left me the truth as her final act of love and trust. A new resolve settled over me, quiet but unshakable. My mother's story wasn't over. Her confession was not an ending. It was a beginning. It was a map. She had given me back her own past, and in doing so, she had given me a piece of my own future. I didn't know if I would ever find him. I didn't know if he even knew he was adopted. I didn't know if he would want to be found. But in the quiet of my mother's house, surrounded by the evidence of her two lives, I knew I had to try. For her, for him, and for me, I had to find my brother. I had to tell him about the woman who was Eleanor.